There's a photograph taken in the early 1980s at the Sevmash shipyard in Severodvinsk that captures the absolute, terrifying absurdity of the Cold War. In the background, shrouded in the gray mist of the Russian north, sits the colossal, windowless bulk of a building hall known as Workshop 55. It was the largest covered dock in the world, and sliding out of it, stern first into the freezing waters of the White Sea, is a machine that seems to defy the basic rules of naval architecture. It is a submarine, but its proportions are entirely wrong. It's too wide, too tall, impossibly long. Its sail alone is the size of a multi-story apartment block. On the deck, workers bundled in heavy parkas look like tiny insects crawling across the back of a surfaced monster. This was Project 941, codenamed Akula by the Soviets, meaning shark, and known to the West by its NATO reporting name, the Typhoon-class. The Typhoon is a contradiction. The survival rule for any submarine is stealth. Submarines survive by staying small and slipping through thermoclines unnoticed. Yet, the Soviet Union poured a massive chunk of its GDP into a 48,000-ton submerged behemoth, physically larger by displacement than most World War II aircraft carriers. It's still the biggest submarine ever built. But making a stealth machine so huge it barely fits in its own bases defies all logic. People usually write off the Typhoon's size as Soviet megalomania, the Navy just wanting the biggest toy on the strategic playground. But ships this expensive aren't built on ego. They're built on engineering realities and strategic panic. To understand the Typhoon, forget the Hollywood fame from The Hunt for Red October. Look at Soviet missile tech. Look at the desperation that forced engineers to build an underwater city capable of ending the world. If you like technical breakdowns of naval design and maritime strategy, hit subscribe. I've got more coming. The Typhoon's story actually starts with a missile. In the late 1970s, the U.S. Navy was preparing to deploy the Ohio-class submarine, armed with the Trident I C-4 ballistic missile. The Trident was a triumph of solid fuel rocket chemistry, compact, reliable, and capable of striking the Soviet Union from relative safety. At the time, the Soviet strategic deterrent relied on liquid-fueled missiles in their Delta-class submarines. Liquid-fueled rockets are volatile. The propellants are toxic and corrosive. A leak inside a cramped pressure hull is a nightmare that has killed plenty of Soviet submariners. The Soviet leadership demanded parity. They wanted a solid-fueled missile to match the Trident, and the Mikhaev Rocket Design Bureau built the R-39 RIF. On paper, it worked. An 8,000-kilometer range and 10 MIRVs. In reality, the R-39 was a monster. The Soviet chemical industry couldn't cast high-energy solid propellants into compact spaces the way the Americans did. To get the required range and payload, the R-39 weighed 84 tons and was over 16 meters long. It was twice as heavy and far wider than the Trident. When naval architects at the Rubin Design Bureau in Leningrad saw the specs, they hit a wall. You can't just shove 20 84-ton missiles into a traditional hull. A conventional submarine is basically a single steel pipe. Make the pipe wide enough to hold these missiles, and the draft gets too deep. The sub wouldn't even float out of the shallow White Sea or fit in any Soviet naval base. Lengthen the hull to spread them out, and it becomes a fragile, unmaneuverable noodle that breaks its own back in heavy seas. Led by chief designer Sergei Kovalev, the engineers at Rubin solved the puzzle by ditching the traditional submarine layout entirely. They designed a submerged catamaran. The smooth outer hull of a Typhoon is a lie. That black casing isn't the pressure hull protecting the crew. It's just a hydrodynamic shell, a light cover giving the chaotic machinery inside a streamlined shape to slip through the water. Beneath the steel sits a multi-hulled structure. Inside the Typhoon sit two parallel main pressure hulls, each roughly the size of a standard Delta-class submarine. Situated between them at the bow is the missile compartment holding the 20 R-39 launch tubes. By placing the missiles between the pressure holes instead of inside them, Kovalev solved the height problem. The missiles extend up into the sail and down toward the keel without penetrating the crew compartments. This kept the draft shallow enough for Soviet ports. But the fix created a new headache. Between the two main hulls, an independent torpedo room at the bow, a central command module beneath the sail, and a stern module for mechanical linkages, the Typhoon had 5 distinct habitable pressure hulls. To make them strong enough for deep diving but light enough to float, the Soviets built the main cylinders from high-strength titanium. Titanium is strong and non-magnetic but hard to weld. It requires enclosed, argon-filled environments, so the metal doesn't absorb oxygen and become brittle. That's where the design backfired. When you put titanium pressure hulls inside a steel outer hull and drop it all into conductive salt water, you build a colossal battery. The dissimilar metals trigger intense galvanic corrosion. The steel outer hull would literally dissolve as electrons flowed to the titanium. To stop their flagship from rusting apart on its first patrol, the Soviets installed huge cathodic protection systems, using sacrificial zinc anodes and active electrical currents to trick the ocean's chemistry. It was a maintenance nightmare that plagued the fleet forever. Plus, the sheer volume of air in those pressure hulls, combined with the cavernous spaces between them that flooded to submerge the boat, gave the Typhoon over 30% reserve buoyancy. Most nuclear subs sit around 10 to 15%. Surfaced, the Typhoon rode incredibly high, almost like a surface ship. This was deliberate. To understand why, you have to look at the Arctic Ocean. Think about the men who had to drive this thing. The Typhoon wasn't designed to prowl the open Atlantic playing cat and mouse with American attack subs in the GIUK gap. For a ship this size, that was a suicide mission. Instead, Soviet naval doctrine relied on the bastion strategy. The sub would leave port on the Kola Peninsula, slip under the permanent ice cap of the Arctic Circle, and vanish. The ice above provided a physical shield against American patrol aircraft and satellites, while the grinding noise of shifting flows masked the submarine from NATO hydrophones. The Typhoon would loiter in the dark for up to 120 days, a mobile doomsday silo waiting for the radio transmission signaling World War III. But if that order came, the Typhoon had to launch its missiles. And you can't launch an 84-ton ballistic missile through solid ice. The submarine had to surface. That's why the ship had 30% reserve buoyancy. When a Typhoon needed to break through the Arctic ice, it didn't ram it moving forward. It stopped completely, hovering a few dozen meters below the canopy. The crew used upward-looking sonar to find a fracture or a spot where the ice was less than 3 meters thick. Then, the captain ordered a rapid blow of the main ballast tanks. Thousands of tons of highly compressed air blasted into the ballast spaces between the titanium and steel hulls. The physics were violent. The buoyancy grabbed the submarine and hurled it upward. The reinforced sail capped with a hardened steel roof acted as a battering ram. The submarine smashed into the ice cap with millions of pounds of force, shattering through up to 3 meters of solid sea ice. Submariners on Project 941 described the maneuver as ear-splitting. The vessel shuddered. The shriek of ice scraping down the outer steel hull resonated through the pressure hulls like a physical blow. The ship would heave, roll, and settle onto the surface, surrounded by broken floes. Immediately, hydraulic rams forced open the heavy hatch covers, physically shoving multi-ton ice blocks off the deck to clear the launch tubes. It was brute force engineering, but it allowed the Typhoon to weaponize the Arctic. Moving nearly 50,000 tons of submerged steel and breaking through polar ice requires serious power. To push the Typhoon, the Soviets used the OK-650 pressurized water reactor. 2 of them, actually. Each OK-650 reactor generated 190 megawatts of thermal energy. That's a combined 380 megawatts of raw nuclear heat, enough to power a medium-sized city, contained within a shielded titanium pressure hull. The reactors used highly enriched uranium-235 to heat primary loop water under extreme pressure so it wouldn't boil. This primary loop passed through a heat exchanger, boiling a secondary loop of water into high-pressure steam. That steam blasted into turbines, driving the submarine's twin propeller shafts. But translating 380 megawatts into forward motion comes with a steep acoustic cost. To push the wide beam of the Typhoon to its top submerged speed of 27 knots, those reactors had to run hard. The power channeled into 2 7-bladed variable pitch propellers. Because the sub operated in shallow water and heavy ice, the propellers were encased in cylindrical shrouds called quart nozzles. This protected the blades from shattering against submerged ice. The quart nozzles protected the propellers, but they added severe hydrodynamic drag. Plus, stepping down the high RPM of the steam turbines to the low RPM of the propellers required a ton of mechanical reduction gearing. That created an acoustic nightmare. In submarine warfare, vibration is death. A vibrating gear tooth or a humming coolant pump sends acoustic waves right through the hull. An American Los Angeles-class submarine can hear that from dozens of miles away. To fix this, the Soviets used a raft system. The turbines, reduction gears, and auxiliary machinery weren't bolted directly to the pressure hull. They were mounted on steel platforms suspended on enormous pneumatic shock absorbers. This two-tier isolation absorbed vibrations before they hit the outer hull. On the outside, the Typhoon's steel hull was coated in anechoic tiles, thick, rubberized blocks designed to absorb enemy sonar pings and dampen internal noise. The anechoic coating on a single Typhoon weighed over 800 tons. It was glued onto the steel hull by hand in freezing conditions. Do you think the multi-hull approach was worth the acoustic and maintenance trade-offs? Let me know in the comments. So, was the Typhoon quiet? By Soviet standards in the late 1970s, yes. It was much quieter than the older Delta-class subs. But physics is unforgiving. You can't completely hide a 48,000-ton object dragging an immense surface area through the water. At high speeds, water friction against the hull and the wake from those shrouded propellers created a loud acoustic signature. Active enemy sonar would bounce off the sheer broadside of the Typhoon like a flashlight hitting a barn door. The sub survived by being just quiet enough to blend into the noisy acoustic environment of the Arctic ice cap, where grinding ice and thermal layers scramble sonar. The Typhoon's sensors were just as large. Tucked beneath the bow torpedo tubes was the SCAT-KS sonar complex, using a cylindrical array of hydrophones to listen for enemy subs. American submarines favored spherical sonar arrays for full-dimension coverage. The Soviet cylindrical array worked well horizontally, but had blind spots directly above and below. To compensate, the Typhoon ran under-ice navigation sonars, high-frequency mine avoidance arrays, and a towed acoustic array spooled out from the tail to listen behind the ship. For all the tech inside its titanium cylinders, operating Project 941 was exhausting. People love to talk about the creature comforts for its 160-man crew, the heated swimming pool, wood-paneled sauna, solarium, and the birdcage in the relaxation zone. Western analysts viewed this as an absurd luxury. To a Russian submariner, it was basic psychological survival. Spending 120 days under the ice is an exercise in sensory deprivation. The crew lived with the constant dread of being the vanguard for global annihilation. Amine chemical plants scrubbed their air. The lighting was artificial, the smell of diesel and ozone was inescapable, and the subtle vibration of the reactors was a constant reminder of the nuclear fire a few compartments away. The pool, the sauna, and the sun lamps weren't perks. They were engineering additions designed to keep the crew from collapsing into claustrophobia on a 4-month dark patrol. The hardest part of running a Typhoon wasn't operating under the ice, it was keeping it alive at the pier. The size of Project 941 created an infrastructure nightmare. When the first Typhoon, TK-208, was finished, the Soviet Navy realized they had almost nowhere to put it. The sub was too wide for standard dry docks and too deep for standard piers. The Soviets had to fund a massive dredging operation at the Nerpikya Naval Base on the Kola Peninsula just to park them. When a nuclear sub is tied to the pier, its reactors usually run at minimal power to save fuel and reduce wear. The ship plugs into shore power to keep the lights and heating on. But the Typhoon's electrical demands were so huge that local power grids in the remote Russian north couldn't handle the load. Plugging in a Typhoon would brown out the base. The Navy had to build dedicated power barges that floated next to the piers, burning diesel 24/7 just to run the submarine's internal systems. The maintenance was backbreaking. The complex hydraulics for the 20 missile hatches leaked in the cold. The rubber anechoic tiles frequently peeled off during under-ice operations. Submariners would return from a 100-day patrol only to be handed scrapers and adhesive, forced onto scaffolding in the freezing wind to glue rubber back onto frozen steel. Galvanic corrosion between the titanium and steel meant the sacrificial zinc anodes had to be replaced constantly by divers in freezing water. The ship's size just meant more valves to leak, more electrical cabling to short out, and more surface area to maintain. It was a maintenance catastrophe. Compare the Akula to its NATO contemporary, the American Ohio-class, and the difference in naval philosophy is obvious. The Ohio is a sleek, single-hull design. It displaces about 18,700 tons submerged, less than half the Typhoon. Yet the Ohio carries 24 Trident missiles compared to the Typhoon's 20. The Americans packed more firepower into a smaller sub because of chemistry. The Trident D5 missile is energy-dense and compact. Because the missiles fit inside a single steel pressure hull, the Ohio didn't need a catamaran layout or a multi-hulled titanium frame. The Ohio is a teardrop moving cleanly through the water. Inherently quieter and much easier to maintain, the Ohio was designed to roam the open oceans, using acoustic stealth to vanish into the Atlantic or Pacific. The Typhoon, burdened by the massive R-39 missiles, relied on brute force. It was designed to punch through ice and hide in the shallow acoustic mess of the Arctic. If the Ohio was a sniper, the Typhoon was a heavily armored shotgun. The Typhoon was so large because it wasn't really a submarine in the traditional sense. It was a mobile, under ice, ICBM silo built around a single weapon system. The Soviet Union lacked the chemical engineering to make a smaller missile, so Rubin's naval architects just built a massive rig to make the R-39 float. They engineered their way out of a dead end with raw reactor power and unapologetic mass. But that mass had an economic limit. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, only 6 of the planned 7 Typhoons were finished. The new Russian Federation inherited a fleet it couldn't afford to maintain. The base infrastructure was crumbling. The R-39 missiles were aging, and their solid fuel was becoming dangerously unstable. The factories that built them were now in an independent Ukraine, severing the supply chain. Sending a single Typhoon to sea cost an absolute fortune compared to running the smaller Delta IV-class subs. Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, the Typhoons were bankrupting the Northern Fleet's budget. Eventually, they were tied up at the piers in Severodvinsk and left to rust. The end of the Akula-class is deeply ironic. Under the Nunn-Lugar Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, the United States paid millions to help Russia dismantle the very submarines built to destroy American cities. Scrapping a Typhoon is a massive undertaking. Hydraulic shears tear through the steel outer hull to expose the pristine titanium pressure cylinders. The OK-650 reactors are defueled and cut away for storage. The amount of high-grade steel and titanium pulled from a single sub temporarily depressed local scrap metal markets. The era of the Typhoon is over. The last vessel, the Dmitry Donskoy TK-208, served as a testbed for Russian Bulava ballistic missiles. That role ended when the boat was decommissioned to make way for the Bore-class. Those new submarines feature single hulls and compact solid fuel missiles, looking a lot more like the American Ohio-class. Project 941 stands as a monument to Cold War paranoia, a time when 2 superpowers bent economics and physics to the breaking point for mutually assured destruction. The Typhoon was heavily flawed, loud, and economically ruinous, but it was a masterpiece of brute force engineering. It carried the threat of the apocalypse under the Arctic ice, guaranteeing that a nuclear strike against the Soviet Union would be met with retaliation. It is the largest submarine ever built, and likely the largest one that ever will be. If you like this analysis, leaving a like helps more people find the channel. Thanks for watching.